I want to see how many of you did last week's homework. I don't know if you remember, I gave you some homework, and it had to do with doing a morning intention thing every day. It was, where is it? It was something right here. I had it set up so I could find it. Okay. I got it. I'm getting there now. I'm sorry about this. I thought I had it all ready, and
hi, Judy.
All of a sudden it was hidden.
How are you, honey? Good. How are you?
For some reason, it's not letting me find that document. Let me try one more time.
I'm doing great. Oh, there's Jamie.
Jamie, hi Jamie.
All right, here it is. Here was your homework for last week. Let's see how many of you did it. First of all, you're supposed to read this sideways. Everyone read it sideways?
Yeah.
Or did you push the button right up here which turns it? It's a little easier for some of us that way. And remember, you're supposed to sit each day and just kind of think about what is your intention for the day, so that you began thinking more mindfully about the day. Taking some time to just rest and think, and stating your intention for the day. And just know that it wasn't so important what intention you stated as that you were very purposefully and mindfully looking at something. How many were able to do that a little bit?
I was.
How many failed at least one day? Because that's okay too. Tell me, those of you who did it well, how did it feel?
It felt good. It really helped me.
Good.
I noticed the whole day it was better. And so that intention is something I want to do every day, but sometimes I forget.
Yeah. Starting a day mindfully and intentionally does make it so that then as you approach the day, you approach it differently, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
So keep doing that. Try to just incorporate that for the next few weeks, just to kind of get better and better at making that happen. Okay. Now we're in a section. Oops. Man, I'm sucking at doing stuff today, so I'm sorry about the technology today. We're talking about being morose. You should have read 3 chapters. The first chapter is why are you not morose? And the Dalai Lama, if you remember, didn't understand that word. It was outside of his typical thing that he'd heard. But then again, most of us haven't heard that word very much, have we?
No.
And sometimes as you move into some of these intentionality things, it's that you run into words, phrases, spaces, concepts that are outside your right now. Especially, I think we run into those kinds of things when we run into somebody else. And sometimes when that other person brings those things to us, it's not always in the best way. They divert us from what's more important. This week I talked over Facebook with a lady that I've known for a long time. We've been on several different things together. She has left the Methodist Church because we weren't conservative enough for her, or didn't have enough directed of activity of what she wanted to do. And she was of the mind in the midst of this week's activities that we should be paying attention more to officers that are being hurt. And my point of view is not that I want us to ignore officers that are being hurt or killed in the midst of everything that's going on, but you've put up a list over the last 36 hours of maybe 15, 20 people that police officers that have been hurt. At the same time, there were probably thousands of innocent protesters that were hurt in one way or another. Are you using those 12 to blind you to something else? She didn't like that. She thought I was the blind one, and maybe I am in a lot of ways. But that type of thing is what I think the Archbishop and the Dalai Lama are talking about on the quote that's in front of you. The real problem is here, the Dalai Lama said, pointing at his head. The Archbishop tapped his chest to emphasize the heart as well. And here, mind and heart. What gets in your way of you sensing your mind and your heart? Right? For me, like I said, it was my friend that diverted me away from. What diverts you? What hides mind and heart from you?
I would say chatter.
Chatter does. And there's a lot of that in life, and of all different sorts. Thank you. What else?
Could you restate that question, Jim?
What gets in the way of you paying attention to your mind and your heart? What is it that makes it so that you're focusing on something different? Like, for example, I'll give you a really easy example. If I drove hundreds of miles from here to California, and if I'm in a car behind the wheel, that other driver in front of me diverts my attention. Not in good ways. Right? And takes me away from that mindfulness, that intentionality of mind and heart. What is it for you as you go through life? And it could be, maybe the question is, who does that to you? Because very often it's a who. And I don't even mean that in a really bad way. I do mean, though, that that person makes it so that you're challenged. My wife, who's trying to come on and can't hear us yet, sometimes is the one that gets me away from mind and heart. She's also the one that actually that often helps me to find mind and heart, but it doesn't mean that she's always the one that helps me that way. Sometimes she's my roadblock to it because of whatever is going on, whatever I see her as the obstacle in that moment. Yourselves? Who else?
Well, the news. I'd say the news right now.
Yeah.
News definitely does that, right? How many are at least a bit occupied in trying to figure out what the president was doing as he dispersed the crowds in order to stand in front of a church?
Also, the fact that our police are becoming so militarized, and I put this on Facebook, but it's like we think that the democracy we have is going to last forever, but we're a very young nation.
We are.
And I mean, I've read about Chile and other places in the world where dictatorships start with a wannabe autocrat, which we have, and a very strong military or police force that's under their bidding, and we have that. And also we have an economy that's tanking, which is causing a lot of unrest. So I think I do mindfulness and meditation every day, and recently it's been really hard sometimes to get into that space because I keep going to, like, I read the Times every morning after I'm meditating.
Yeah.
Because I do it before I don't. But it's just really hard sometimes to get into that space right now because my mind keeps going to what's happening.
Absolutely. And the tough part is this reading something like that, like the Times, can help you to be in that mind spot that the Dalai Lama was talking about. But he doesn't necessarily mean just learn everything you can, but he does mean take your mind, expand it, make it into that which works with and for you, not that which blocks you. And so if you're reading whatever you're reading in order to block out some of the voices that maybe you're not prepared to hear right now, you may not be hearing with your mind. And so the same reading can both be helpful or it could be hurtful depending on how you're doing it. How many have sometimes been guilty of already having the right answer
Oh, yeah.
and forgetting to listen to whatever somebody else is saying? And
Mhm.
pastors hate that. I'm just kidding. It's the challenge. And at least part of what we're trying to do with joy is trying to figure out how to get past that. Okay? Most people, says the book, most people never pay much attention to the ultimate source of a happy life, which is inside, not outside.
Yeah.
How many often depend on the outside being perfect? Somebody in your family doing the right thing. Somebody not driving the car slowly in front of you on the freeway. Somebody acting like you instead of as a different person. If we're waiting for all of that, those are outward stimuli that aren't going to bring us to true happiness. In fact, they made a very strong distinction, and we've made this distinction last week as well, but they made a very strong distinction about joy and happiness and the difference. Let me show that to you. Oops. Oops. It's wonderful to discover that what we want is not actually happiness. It's not what I would speak of, says the Dalai Lama. I would speak of joy. Joy subsumes happiness. I think he means, as I've read on, I think he means that happiness has an external source, where joy has an internal source. And that doesn't mean happiness is wrong. It means that sometimes we seek for somebody to make us happy instead of finding that which brings us joy, that which assumes just the happiness. When have you sought for just happiness and missed joy, missed the deeper? They go on to say that exploring joy is nothing less than exploring what makes human experience satisfying. Not what makes this moment satisfying, but human experience satisfying. So tell me some of the things that you've discovered in life that have brought something deeper and more powerful than just the happiness of the moment.
My marriage,
A marriage can do that, absolutely.
relationship, and absolutely. It's just, it's not always good, okay, what you say, bringing happiness, it's actually challenging, but it's just something that is us.
Good, thank you, Jade.
For me-
What else?
For me, it's my work.
Work can do that, absolutely. Finding something that you both enjoy and that gives meaning to life and changes the world around you can absolutely bring joy.
Because it's not always easy and it's not always fun
No?
and it can be a lot of work. But the overall experience, or for me, is joy.
Yeah. Good, thank you. What else?
For me, it's been reading. I have always, since I was a little girl, reading was a way for me to, it saved my life. It's like, it's the way I knew as a child that there was another way of, there was another world out there, that if I could survive where I was long enough, I could get to that world. And I could create my own world. And since then, it's like, it's been an avenue where it's expanded my world terrifically, especially with my health issues and stuff. It's like I'm able to go to places that I would not be able to otherwise.
Yeah.
And I'm able to explore worlds and ideas that would be, and it brings me that my grandchildren, my son and daughter, that's what brings me greatest joy.
Nice. Thank you very much. I like that a lot. Anybody else? This last weekend, we brought my mother-in-law up to Northern California. And I talked on Zoom with one of our grandchildren, our nieces that's up there. Her name is Hannah. And Hannah had a birthday. So we sang happy birthday to her. She's 9 years old this year. But I looked at her and I said, you know what? Let me tell you about one moment that I always remember. It happened 9 years ago this week when I held a little baby in my arms and everyone else had gone somewhere else and they were gone for an hour or two. And I sat there with that baby, just holding her. And Hannah knew it was her that I was talking about. And just the gorgeousness of that new life and who she was just filled me with joy. And I think that's what we're trying to find, is what carries us beyond just this moment. Because it was more than just, here I have a baby in my arms. It was the sense of life and newness that she represented. And my sense of connection that we would have for us as long as our lives ran parallel, right? That's what we're seeking, is what brings joy. Now, the hard part is in the midst of that joy, and the reason for the title of this section, why are you not morose? Archbishop was asking that, and the Dalai Lama didn't understand what he meant. I think partially because he didn't know the word morose, but also because I think that he had superseded what would have made him the sad that the Archbishop assumed he would have. Because both the Archbishop and the Dalai Lama went through things that would defeat many of us, right? Challenging, difficult, life-altering things, which could have easily set them into the negative, destroyed them in many ways. And he was asking, why is it that you can do this? How is it that you've learned to get past that which stole your country, which left you alone? And the Dalai Lama's answer had more to do with, from this, I have become better. Not because of this, I have become worse. And so it wasn't what happened to him, but what changed in him that was the difference maker. So I want you to go back to something that was a place of pain and suffering for you. Who are you today because you went through that pain and suffering? What is an essential part of you that is different because you had to go through that? And I'm not saying, go ahead, Garnett.
Well, 32 years ago, in August, actually, it'll be 32 years that my divorce with my boy's father became final. And that was hard. And he's he's family now, and we have a very comfortable relationship as family. But I was telling him one time, I said, you know, if we were still married, you would be miserable. And he said, how could you say that? How could you know that? And I said, because the person I would have become would have made sure, darn tootin' sure, you were as miserable or more miserable than I was in that moment. Because I have developed into this person that I would not want to be that person. I would just not want to be that person because we would have both been very unhappy, and I would have been so unhappy I'd want to make him unhappy. And so I went through that, and I'm so glad I am who I am instead of who I would have been.
Mhm. Great. Thank you for sharing that. The rest of you? How'd you get through that pain and suffering and so it would transform you rather than destroy you?
12-step meetings.
12-step meetings help a lot, aren't they?
Um,
Yeah. And 12-step meetings are not without pain and suffering themselves, are they?
nope.
But they help transform you to a different space, don't they? And
Yeah.
I think that those 12-step meetings, it's really important. Part of what happens there is part of what these two wise voices talk about. They say this was not a denial of pain and suffering, but a shift in perspective from oneself and toward others, from anguish to compassion. As we recognize others' suffering and realize we are not alone, our pain is lessened. In those 12-step meetings, in those communities that you form there, it's not like you're asking that other person to fix you, but having that companion on the journey, having that other person who can, in a very real way, say, I know the type of thing you're going through.
Yes.
Helps a lot. Right? Whether you like it all the time or not. Sometimes their wisdom is not easy to hear, is it? But ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to go from the negative of whatever the situation has brought on, whatever the problem has brought on, whatever the person has given to you. And you're trying to transform it into something more than just that. Because life seems to sometimes have aims for us that we don't agree with. You know, I still don't know what to do with the president's actions this week. It feels so betraying of what I think America is. But I get to decide, do I use it in a way that builds me up, helps me to become something more? Or do I use it for just the betrayal? What do I do? The question they ask is not, how do I escape? It is, how can I use this as something positive?
I think that one thing that's occurring right now for me is that, every day is unpredictable. Like I don't know what will happen personally or in the world. And, who would think in December there would be a pandemic in February, March?
I didn't.
It seems to me that is actually freeing because it's kind of like, it's more, I have to roll with it all the time. It's like something happened a few days ago that came out of nowhere. And what choice it said, what choice is it? You just have to roll with it these days. That's what it's teaching me.
Yeah. Whether you want to roll with it or not, it's teaching you that you can.
Right.
Yeah. And in that isolation, there's a lot of opportunities if we allow it to happen, right? We can go and clean out those parts of the house that we haven't looked at for years because it's too messy or too daunting. But it can also be something along, why don't I start a new hobby that I haven't done before? Betty, while she was here, my mother-in-law, she painted rocks.
Oh, good.
All
Yeah.
kinds of rocks and scattered them around the neighborhood, right? And she became in this moment. And that's what we have to figure out how to do in each time. They make one last point in this section that was important. In the midst of much of the pain and suffering, much of it comes down to it's because we're losing somebody, whether it's because someone in our life that we love dies, or because of divorce we choose to separate, or or whatever it happens to be. And it often means we have to find our new community. And this was the quote: "Wherever you have friends, that's your country. And wherever you receive love, that's your home." How have you escaped from some foreign country and found a new home? And had to leave behind what you knew, that you went somewhere else and found your new family. Where did that happen for you?
Well, we left Tacoma, Washington, and came here full time 9 years ago. And it was exciting to come here. And I've, been vested, and now I've retired again from Arizona teaching, but it's still a new land for us, like Tacoma, where we live for decades. Just things that Mount Rainier and Puget Sound and the flowers and things like that I miss so much.
Yeah, things that Arizona can't duplicate.
Yeah.
No,
right?
Not in that way.
Right. And it has, Arizona has things that Tacoma can't duplicate. I don't mean
Right.
that in a pejorative way. I mean that you lose things when you move here because it's a different place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But you visit, usually you can, and that's been a struggle, knowing that we probably shouldn't take a plane anywhere, at least not for a while. I feel like we're in a waiting game somehow
Yeah.
in this virus pandemic thing. Like, I'm not, what are we waiting for? I guess a vaccine, but who knew that would take the second story in the news?
Yeah.
It's just been a crazy time in so many ways.
Yeah. And part of all of that is because wherever we were at before all of this went on, we had relatively under control. We had a firm grip on the wheel and thought that we were able to take care of most things. And all of a sudden this pandemic comes up. All of a sudden the murder of George Floyd comes up. And suddenly we see so much that's bigger than just what I can fix. What I know. And we have to trust beyond that. And anytime we go through suffering, it feels out of our control. That's in some ways the very nature of suffering. Someone else, something else causing this that I don't like and I don't want. What do we do in the midst of that?
Find the lesson. Find the jewel in it.
Yeah.
And I think you have to be open and you have to ask for it. And actually the upset passes quicker. The disappointment or whatever. And I think that everything that's a sword is a double-edged sword.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It has its good and it has its sadness.
Right.
And use it.
I think of some of the best days of our lives. It's not without pain. On the day that your child is born, there's pain that happens that day. Yeah. On the day that you say I do, you're also saying goodbye to mom and dad in the way that you used to be connected that way. Mm-hmm. Right? And you're having to say it's going to be different now. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean it's a bad different. It means that it's a change that you're going to have to figure out. And it's not going to be perfect, right?
But it does help you to become more compassionate.
It does.
Because you get, my mother died 26 years ago. It was very difficult and painful. And now I feel her love still, and her presence, and other people have died since then. Obviously, my dad and friends that have died, they've become like a counsel in my heart or my mind of, I run it by them,
Yeah.
well, what do you think? How would you handle this pandemic, Dad?
Yeah.
Kind of,
Yeah.
which in a way there isn't a death if you can see them that way in your life.
Yeah.
But I think just compassion has grown. Not that I didn't have compassion, but I like really understand when people have a parent die,
Yeah.
or they've moved, or that kind of struggle is human.
Yeah.
And this too shall pass. You wish it would pass sometime sooner than it does, but it does. The good and the bad both pass. And I think the Dalai Lama having that Buddhist the detachment, I think is helpful. And just realizing it's the journey, and you're gonna keep going, take a deep breath, get a good night's sleep, meditate, get out in nature. All those things help to navigate.
At one point they said, nothing beautiful in the end comes without a measure of some pain, some frustration, some suffering. In order for Jamie to get to the job that she has, which brings meaning to her life, she had to go through those tests and those times of studying and those classes that weren't quite interesting, right? But it brings her to the space that brings the greater joy. And that's true with all of us. But they said something that's remarkable. Let me put this up there so you can see this. Oops. Oh. Sorry. This is the one. In a kind of paradoxical way, it is how we face all of the things that seem to be negative in our lives that determines what kind of person we become. Those moments of difficulty and challenge and what we would rather not go through also help to form us, and that they show what we're going to do under pressure. Will we buckle and become weaker? Will we bow underneath the moment of that, or will we allow it to change us into something more than what we were before that? It's the old story of the diamond and the piece of coal under all the pressure turns into the diamond.
Yeah.
Who do you turn into in every moment? And it's not simple, because we lose things in the midst of it, don't we? We lose things that we would rather hold on to. When you talk about someone dying, that's never simple to do, because you may want to call Dad on the phone and you can't do it that way. So you have to figure out the spirit phone, right? There's some other way to talk and connect that isn't quite the same way as dialing that number that you were used to dialing.
Jim, do you have a go-to process? What are your tools when you deal with struggles?
That's a good question. There's lots of different techniques to get through the difficulties, and none of them are necessarily better than others. You have to figure out what this current one calls for. But I think that openness usually helps a lot. If you can face this new place and say something is going to be wonderful about it, you can face this new person and say something is going to be a blessing about them. I think that helps. So that's an optimism, I would guess. it's not that you don't, it's not that you don't have to be cautious. Maybe you want to be cautious, but not pessimistically cautious. Somehow open eyes, saying there's going to be a positive here, in spite of whatever it seems like at first. But I learned a lot of that running, right? When you're running, when you're competing, you go through a lot of pain in that training time, right? I remember my ankles swelling up because it was the beginning of the season and we were running up and down bleachers for a time, and just go, wow, what do I do now? Well, you get through it, and you know that your body is going to somehow strengthen. In the spirit things of life, you know your soul is going to strengthen in the midst of it. So you have to know that that's going to happen somehow. Because it's not going to feel like it in the time.
People
think-
used to tell you get stronger after adversity. And I used to say, yeah, but I wish I wasn't so strong.
Yeah. And the hard part though is that it's not necessarily simple. It's not a simple definition of you get stronger, because someone who, for example, is in a car accident and is paralyzed, becomes a quadriplegic, they don't become stronger in some ways. Their legs do not work the same way they used to, and however they define themselves by that good, strong legs that they had isn't the way they get to define themselves anymore. And so it's a different kind of strength, a different kind of identity that you have to find in that moment.
I think for me, it's surrendering to God, just, on a momental, what something is, no big thing, but just upsetting. But then surrendering, just giving the every day to God, starting out in the morning.
Yeah.
And I think that it's almost like in adversity, a partnership, more of a partnership. A relationship with God helps me make it through, and also I try to keep a sense of humor.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that he talked about in here about selfishness, because in the midst of this thing, it does call us to examine selfishness. But he talked about both wise and foolish selfishness. And in the midst of suffering, we often get very self-centered and, well, how do I save me? How do I save this piece of me that feels threatened? How do I not let this be hurt? And he said the wise kind of selfishness is when we, in those moments, reach beyond ourselves and look to see how do we help someone else? How do we see more than just our own pain, our own suffering? Because in that, find that connection to someone else, helping that someone else is actually going to help us. It's selfish still, but it's wise selfishness, because in helping them, it comes back and helps us. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a weird paradoxical way of looking at it, but I like the idea, because most of the time when we're stuck in a space that is less than perfect for us, the thing that will help us is if we can find something bigger than just us to carry us forward. Either what is this doing to me, or what can distract me from what is happening to me. And in both of those things, what we're going to find is something larger than just the pain of the moment. Because the pain in the moment is real, but it's not the only real. Just like happiness is relatively superficial in that it is a reaction to something that is going on around me. I'm happy because. Pain is also that way. I have a pain right now because. I have a pain because I cut my arm, because somebody threw a ball and hit my head, whatever it happens to be. But it's not an ongoing thing. There's something beyond just that pain. And some of those pains, I don't mean to try to diminish them, because some of those pains are huge, right? Enormous types of pains. But they also are relatively finite. And can we find that which is larger than just that finite?
Well, I think it's gratitude too, you know, like, and, like when you cut your finger, you think that you're in all this pain and you can only focus on the finger. But if you start thinking about your feet that are in good shape and your eyes that are in good shape, and, you know, just being thankful for the rest of it, you know, you keep the perspective of the big picture, and it's only that thing.
In fact, they gave 3 things that they said we should look at in a time like this. Here were their 3 points. Oops. This one right here. The 3 factors that seem to have the greatest influence on increasing happiness are, first of all, our ability to reframe our situation more positively. Second, like Jade just said, our ability to experience gratitude. And third, our choice to be kind and generous. All right, so let's go back to one of the things you said were one of those difficult moments, going through a breakup of a relationship. It is tough, but if you can look and say, but this is what the situation is going to bring to me, right? You reframe the situation, not just in the loss that it is, but in what's going to happen and how you're going to grow because of that. You experience gratitude, maybe for those people who show you, who support you, who help you in the moment, something, and give you something more than just the pain that's there. And you are grateful for that. And also you figure out how to not let this turn you to the negative, because something like the breakup of a relationship can easily give us the negative, can't it? And how do we make it so that that's not all that happens there? It's difficult, because all of us would rather have the something beautiful without the suffering. It'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Thank you.
But one of the things I've learned about the beautiful is sometimes the cause of the suffering. Why is it that when your mom dies, you're sad? Because she was beautiful in your life. And you would not be sad if she hadn't have been that beautiful. Right?
Mhm.
And so the very thing that brings joy also is part of what brings the suffering. It's part of the cost.
You know, they also mentioned how many people are on the planet, that we're one of 7.6 billion people on the planet, and that knowing that so many people have gone through these things, it helps me realize it's not just me. It's about being a human being.
Yes.
And the seasons of being a human being, just like, you know, the seasons that the planet goes through.
That's right.
And like I saw these little tiny quail, saw about 6 or 7 quail running around yesterday, and they were so darling, they were so little. And then I saw later on another mother with little quails, and it was like, now is the time for birth. It's still spring and the flowers are blooming, and then they die out, you know, and the next thing comes and goes, and so is true with us as people. And in the book it talked, well, if we didn't die, it would be just too much for the planet. We'd be too much of a burden.
Yeah.
But it's hard to like just face your own mortality as well as people around you.
It is.
But that's what we do as humans. We are born and we die, just like the little quail and the cactus flowers. It's just the cycle of life, the circle of life, if you will.
Yeah. Whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
Whether we like it or not. But Nancy, coming from the Northwest with those beautiful, gorgeous trees that are up there, What do we know about trees? That it's in the winter that they actually gain their strength for them to be able to stand and grow as large as what they are.
Mm.
And in the summer, they can't. In good weather, they develop relatively weaker pieces of themselves, and it's in the winter that they gain their real strength. So this is where I was at.
Ooh,
Oh,
California.
nice. That's beautiful.
nice.
Saw these beautiful, wonderful redwoods. And these redwoods grow tall because of summer and winter.
Nice.
And so do we.
Yeah.
Those times of struggle help us to be able to be better. Don't you like it a lot when you can sit beside someone who's going through a time and say, I've gone through that same kind of time?
Mhm.
Not that you can speak everything that will fix it for them, but at least you can say, you're not alone in this. I've struggled too. I've had those types of emotions. And if you remember well, you'll remember how someone sat with you that very same way and gave you just enough insight, or just enough support, or just enough something that allowed you to take those next steps. So take a moment to go back into your heart and find those people. I call them saints. Those saints who somehow walked with you through some of those difficult times. And were just there for you, spoke into your life, maybe didn't speak and just put their arm around your shoulder. Who were they for you?
For me, it was my grandmothers.
Uh-huh.
My grandmothers lived close to my family. Ooh, an owl just flew right by. Oh my gosh. Sorry. I had this beautiful panoramic view out my front windows. So anyway, okay. I got distracted by the owl. But I spent one weekend with one grandmother and the next weekend with the other grandmother. And the chaos and violence of my parents' home, I had these safe havens. They both were extremely nurturing and giving and they were my safe place to be in this world. My first sanctuary. And I don't know if I'd be alive without them. And so they were very, very, like I remember my one grandmother, when I was in junior high, I could walk from junior high and have lunch with her. She would have lunch waiting on me. We would listen to Paul Harvey. The rest of the story, I remember that from my junior high. That dates me. And she also taught me, we made waffles every Sunday morning. My other grandmother she just adored me. And it was just, it's like, they're who's with me all the time.
Mm-hmm. I was also thinking of my grandmother, not the warm fuzzy one, the other one. Granny Mae, Nan, we called her. She was a pioneer woman. She was born in northeastern Arizona in a cabin without running water in the 1890s.
Wow.
Right? She went through pioneer life, literally, and had to figure out a lot of very harsh and difficult things to go through. And when I was 13 years old, I went and stayed with her a summer and was doing different things. And she made me like hoe like 1,000,000 acres of corn and stuff like that, right? 'Cause that's the person she was. But in the midst of that also, this was the year I decided I wanted to grow my hair out, which Granny Mae didn't like, right? And it was getting scraggly and everything. And she sat me down in front of my Uncle John to get my hair cut. And I didn't say anything, but I'm sure my face showed how unhappy I was, how heartbreaking it was for me. And somehow this woman who knew she had the right answer about cutting my hair stopped and said, John, let's not do it. And I think about that gift that was completely unlike what she could have believed in. And yet she gave me that gift.
Mm.
How about the rest of you? Who are those saints?
Well, I just wanted to ask Judy, could you bring a photograph next week and show us a picture of your grandparents?
I will do that.
I'd like to see them. It's just, you painted a beautiful story, and I need an image to go with it.
It's my grandmother Ruby and my grandmother Mary. I call them Meemaw. I call them Meemaw.
Nice. I like that.
My person, well, when I was 9, my father passed away very unexpectedly, and my brother was 16, and he took that male role in my family, but he really became my rock not that many years ago when I became everything. Ended up being the guardian for my mother, and as I said, there was 5 of us, and 4 of us were on the same page, and then there was one sibling that was in a completely different book. But my brother was and I'm the baby of the family, and my brother was my rock. I talked to him many times. There was times I might call and talk to him 3 times a day. He's up in the Phoenix area now, and I knew he was always there for me and support me and help me make the right decisions for the family that was supporting what my mother wanted. And he was, as I say, he's been my rock ever since he was 16.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else?
Teachers at school. I loved school.
Yeah. It's amazing how oftentimes those teachers become those people. But what's most interesting about it for me is how teachers become it in a whole different way, don't they? One teacher is there because they're very loving. One teacher is that way because they're very demanding of you, right? And force you to go beyond yourself. And so I love the different ways that teachers become that for you.
What's our homework for next week?
Your homework is to be very aware, okay? And to look and see how it is that there is beauty and suffering side by side. How it is that you right now, because all of us are going through struggles. How do we sit in this continued isolation? How do we, in the midst of even if we're out and about, what do we do when we're 6 feet away from each other still? What do we do in the midst of I mean, today we had a funeral of someone we never knew, but that will maybe change our lives forever. What are we going to do in the midst of that life-altering moment? All of those things that are suffering, but that can also draw us towards. So be very aware of all those things and see and be thankful for all the ways that joy is still present in the midst of that suffering. Even when you kind of wish still you didn't have to suffer. All right?
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Have
Good
a
night.
good one.
Okay, bye-bye.
Good night.